Hello and welcome to the Unbroken Podcast, Down But Not Out, episode 7. Tonight we have our second guest from across the pond, the US of A, and that is Chris Ferrell. Evening, Chris.
Hey, good evening. Thank you for having me.
It's all good. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm good. I'm good. It's nice and warm here. I think it's about 90 degrees right now, and it's 10 a.m.
Yeah, I can see you're in the gym.
I am.
You said before, that's your home gym?
Yes, this is my home gym.
Nice. And if you can't see us, don't worry. We've started recording.
I
It's all
can
good.
see your beautiful faces
Happy
now.
days. And we've also got now joining us Angie.
Hey, Angie.
Has been having
Hi, I can
technical
actually
issues.
see you. And is that a mirror fit rig? I've got one of them. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
It just reminds. Do you know what that reminds me of? It reminds me of the TRX rigs.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, nice. So as I said
Apologies
before,
for my tech faff.
yeah, that's all right. As I said before, tonight we've got Chris on. Chris is going to tell us his story. I heard some of it when we were in the States. I've been following your progress through the other events you've been doing, but we'll get onto them and we'll get cracking. So if you'd just like to start by just telling us who you are and when you joined the military and the role you played.
Yeah, of course. First off, Angie, it's good to see you.
Yes, and you, my love.
Nick, I really appreciate you guys having me on. It's an absolute honor, and I was very blessed to be able to meet you guys in Vegas. And so kind of a backstory on me. My name is Chris Ferrell. I am currently 39 years old or 39 years young, whichever way you want to look at it. My prior life in the military, I was in the Air Force, retired in 2017, joined in 2003. I was Air Force Explosive Ordnance Disposal. So in layman's terms, I was bomb squad. So disarmed roadside bombs, explosive devices, things like that. I was in the Air Force from 2003 to 2017. So I was medically retired after 13 years, 6 months, and 20 days.
Of a high pressure job, by the sound of it as well.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. There's always things that lead to other stuff after all the fun.
Yeah.
So I joined in 2003. I actually came into the Air Force looking to go combat control or pararescue, like a lot of guys, and went through my past tests for the physical portion of it. Did just fine on that. I was young, 19 years old. You can basically do anything you want, or you think you can. And I was told that I had extremely bad eyesight. Like I couldn't read off of someone's shirt from 4 feet away. So they're like, you can't do that. I was like, okay, well, the recruiter was like, well, what do you want to do now? I was like, well, I don't want to be behind a desk. That was the one thing that I made stipulation for. I was like, we are now at war in Afghanistan and Iraq. And I was like, I want to serve my country in a way that I can help protect people. So they talked to me about explosive ordnance disposal, and all he said was EOD. And I was like, what's that? He said, well, you disarm roadside bombs. I was like, hold on. Let me get this straight. You're telling
I can't
me
see, and you're going to let me do that?
that's the exact thing that I told him. I was like, I can't, you're telling me I can't do these other jobs because of my eyesight, but I can do this. And he's like, yes. I was like, cool, sign me up. So I had absolutely no idea what I was getting into. So the pipeline for the school was a little over a year long. I actually spent a little bit longer because there was such a backlog of students trying to get through school and trying to get into classes.
So when you say pipeline, what we call that in the UK is like holding time. You end up just holding and doing random jobs whilst you wait for courses. Was that quite a lot of time spent doing that?
Yeah, so pipeline for us on this side is the actual like school itself.
Okay.
So we start off in, there's a preliminary school that you have to go through first. At the time it was in Medina, Texas, so outside of San Antonio.
Yeah.
You graduate that preliminary course, the first part of the pipeline of school, and then you wait for a slot to open up at Nav School EOD in Florida at Eglin Air Force Base. So really beautiful area, super hot, lots of sharks, But it's funny because nav school EOD is joint service. So all 4 services have to go to the school: Army, Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps. We all wear the same badge. But our EOD school was based off of the UK. So that is where we got EOD from. That's where it came over to us. And I mean, we have a lot of guys. I never got the opportunity to go out to the UK and go through some of the courses out there for EOD techs, but I've had some friends go out, and it's a whole new world. So I'm very thankful for how international coalition wise that the bomb techs all across the world operate, and there's so many similarities but also so many differences.
Yeah, you kind of got to be singing off the same song sheet when you got to pull the same wires out of the same devices.
One team, one fight.
Yeah, that's right. So from there, I graduated EOD school. My wife and I actually just hit 19 years of marriage. So we've been together since we were 17, and we're getting ready to hit 22 years together. So she kind of, the journey, we kind of speak of, she was there in the beginning when I was just 17-year-old, full of piss and vinegar, thought that I had everything. I was 17 and I was like, oh, I'm the best looking guy ever. And I was like, I can do whatever I want. And she had to humble me quite often. So she saw that part of me, and then she saw the transition from that part of me, the happy-go-lucky person, to now I'm in the military. And then I started going to war. And then she saw the transition from that Chris to the Chris that I became, and which was not a good Chris. And then the transition back to the Chris that I am now. So she's watched that entire journey and been there. And if it wasn't for her, I honestly wouldn't be able to talk to you guys right now. I probably wouldn't be here, and that was part of the journey. So I spent, after graduating EOD school, I was in Afghanistan in 2005, 7, 9, 10, 12, and 13. And I was in Iraq in 2008.
And they're not short tours either, are they?
No, they kind of shift. So sometimes I think the shortest one was like 6 months, and then they kind of range. I never had to spend over a year there, so that was good. But with just the deployment time, you also have all your spin up time prior. Yeah. So we would basically come home from a deployment, home about a month or two, and they're like, hey, it's time to ramp up for your next pump.
Yeah.
So,
and it's a long time. I mean, I was I got put on readiness in kind of like April to go to Iraq in 2003. I didn't end up going till September, but we only ever did between 4 and 6 months. I went for 4 months, and I was posted by the US at Talil. But all the guys that I came across were there for just such a long time away from their families. Very different to the way that we do it, and it's quite a feat to maintain.
And it is.
Relationship.
It's really hard. It's really hard on the family as well. People don't realise that.
Because
the same, like my last tour of Afghan, I was for 3 years effectively. My wife was a single parent in Germany with 2 kids, because of all the build-up training to that, back and forth, Hohenfels, Grafenwehr, over to the UK, back to Germany, over to the UK, all of that before we finally deployed. So, and that's, our tours generally only base off 6 to 9 months, 9 months if they started getting towards the end, but yours sort of, from what I've heard with US tours, most guys, you sort of, your average is 9 months to sometimes a year.
So on the Air Force side of it, it's for general Air Force populace, it ranges typically between 3 and 4 months the way that the deployment tempos go. But with us in our career field, so as kind of like force multipliers, we kind of got punched out to whatever locations required with a request for forces. So when the war kicked off, the way that EOD worked on the American side was that Army supported the landmass, which is traditional throughout all EOD branches, throughout all of our coalition. Air Force supported the airfield and the airframes and everything like that. Marine Corps supported the Marine Corps, and Navy supported the NSWs, the Special Warfares, and things like that. However, what we come to realize very quickly we didn't have enough of us, especially fighting on two fronts.
It's flex, isn't it? It's short notice.
Yes.
We need now.
Oh, absolutely. And then as an Air Force guy, it was a very fast turnaround to try to learn the ground combat side of it, because I was a young, enlisted E3. So I was very junior and I knew nothing different. But all my old guys, they were like, oh, hold on, we got to do like full combat stuff now. So we had to go through a lot of extensive combat training to be able to embed with Army and Special Operations teams. And then if need be with the Marine Corps, if they were short on personnel. We were running at a time that in the Department of Defense, we had 4,000 EOD techs, and you're looking at a country that has, a few million. So you're looking at a 0.00 something percent of the Department of Defense personnel wise. So we were spread super thin. So we had to learn it very quickly. And lucky enough, our other services were able to really help spin up that training. We had to be extremely proactive in it as well, in home station training. So we ended up doing a lot of 6-month deployments between, just like you, Nick, 6 to 9 month deployments. Sometimes you get extended longer. The poor Army guys, man, they were minimum 12, sometimes 18. That's a hard life, and just like you said, the families, they're single moms, single dads.
Yeah.
And you're an absentee parent. You come
and
home.
That's underestimated, isn't it? What's going on at home? It's massively underestimated. Your kids are suffering loss of a parent.
Oh my goodness.
And at the same time, you're getting this double, perhaps triple exposure than other airmen to periods of crisis and conflict, which is extreme stress. So you've got it all piled in, and you're doing, what some other people might do in 3 lifetimes of service in one.
Yeah.
In an extremely demanding job.
Yes. And it does. It changes you, and you don't realize or see the changes, but the people that you are loved by see it the second you step off the plane.
Yeah.
They know there's differences. You can hide a lot of things. You can't hide your eyes. And that's one thing that I've learned in my recovery, is that's the one thing that just, it bears your soul.
Window to your soul. Yeah, absolutely.
I seen them. I don't know if you would have seen it. I seen a thread. God, this must have been 6 or 7 months ago, and they just had they had the pictures before and after war. So they showed the the young trainee, and it showed American, it showed English, other nation troops, but it showed them before war, after war, and the difference was astounding.
Oh my goodness, yes. Like I'm 39 now, but I was telling my wife, I was like, lucky enough, I'm half Filipino, so I would probably look like this until I'm about 61 or 62.
A little bit just for men, you'd be right.
Yeah. But as soon as I hit that 63, 64, then I'm going to look like I am a old Filipino grandma that's been working in the rice fields for 40 years. I was like, I'm going to my wife told me that I'm going to look like melted clay. So, but I've seen the same, I got my guys that I was deployed with that were young, very fresh faced, very happy. And then by the time that tour ended, they were very weathered, tired, and not physically, because we physically trained for all of it, but mentally and emotionally, you could see how exhausted everyone was.
You're living hypervigilant. You're living in fight or flight, and it's not short periods of time. And our bodies and our minds are not designed to do that. Your nervous system is not designed to do that. And so when you talk about your recovery, and I don't know if we want to do it now or later, because I know we're a bit shorter of time today than we normally are, but recovery from that is no mean feat. And I think you're always...
No, not at all.
Did you seek therapy? Did you get support? Did you get what you needed?
So my story was a long one. I spent a lot of time kind of backtrack. So I went from a time frame to where all I wanted to do was be part of saving lives. And as I was part more and more of a combat environment and being with just these heroes and studs of men and women, that I was blessed to be assigned to, and witnessing different acts of heroism and being part of a lot of bad things. I went from wanting to only save lives to then wanting to take lives, which changed the person that I was, and put me to the person I became, which is now not the person that I am. But it took a lot, and I went through a lot of phases in my life, in my adult life. You know, I've been in this life now more than I was in my past one now at the age that I'm at. And unfortunately, my wife, my kids have had to be there the entire way, especially my daughter. You know, she's getting ready to turn 16 years old, and she was born in 2007, which was when things started to piece by piece unravel for me. I started changing.
Yeah.
And she was young. You know, I left when she was 3 months old, and I didn't see her again until she was 15 months old. And then she experienced all the other deployments.
Yeah. And that, for a child, that's actually developmental trauma. My daughter was born in 2007, and I'm very fortunate that I had a difference. I'd served most of my career by then, and I chose to not be an operator anymore when I was a mother. But I had been. But your absence from a child's early years, you know, is always going to have an impact. Your wife, being who she is going to mitigate that significantly. But that's really hard for all of you, aside from everything else, is that attachment.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, what I come to realize now at the time that I'm at is there was a difference. Like, even when I was home, I was never really home. You know, my brain, my thoughts, everything was with my team and thinking about some foreign dirt that I would rather have been there fighting at. So home wasn't really home to me. It was my downtime before I got to go home, because fighting was the only thing I cared about. My family actually took second fiddle to war and my teammates. And it's a travesty, you know, and it happens to a lot of us, to where you get so engulfed in that, like that becomes your personality, that becomes who you are. And I ended up falling about 2000, late 2015, early 2016. Everything came crashing down for me. Started realizing all the effects that have happened from the explosions and things like that. And that's when everything unraveled. I ended up finding out that at the time, I had 26 dead spots on my brain from the explosions. Come to find out, I actually have 32, so it's awesome. So I used to be much smarter and much more eloquent when I spoke, not so much anymore. Damage down my spinal cord, C2 through C8, T11, T12, L4 through S1, which is why I have to continue training, because my
not a lot left after that, by the way.
Oh, yeah. And then the traumas of war itself started affecting my personality. And that wasn't just at home. It was at work. It was in my everyday life. And I started becoming extremely volatile.
Yeah.
And that wasn't a good Chris. So I ended up inpatient programs for traumatic brain injuries and post-traumatic stress. Started off at Bethesda in DC area. I was there at the National Intrepid Center of Excellence for about 5 weeks, and they do a overhaul on you to try to figure out what's going on, what damage you've had, and what treatment's required. Sometimes you can go there and then everything's figured out. And during that time, they're like, you have to go somewhere else. So they sent me down to Tampa Bay, to the James Haley VA hospital down there. And there's one of 5 polytrauma clinics, and Tampa is the main one. And that's what they focus on, is traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress, and then health and recovery.
Yeah.
So you're only supposed to be there for about 2 weeks. They do all the stuff. They evaluate you, and they're like, okay, this is what we are going to do for you. And it's inpatient. They're like, you're going to be here for an additional 2 weeks for this, that, and the other, because we need to get your medical care and program set up. Well, the 2 weeks came, evaluation came. When I thought I was going to be there for about 2 or 3 weeks total, ended up almost 6 months. And me and two guys, one Green Beret and one former CAG guy, we just kind of watched everybody come in and out. And we ended up having about 20 plus people come in and out of the program. And we were still sitting there. We're like, what are we still doing here? And eventually I had to tell them, I was like, look, I have to go home. And they're like, Chris, you're doing so well. And I explained to the docs, I was like, look, you can keep me in this hospital room, have a structure set for me for my medical care, my therapy, everything that I have to go through every day. You can give me my medication and have the nurse put it in my mouth and watch me take it. I was like, but I have a family, I have a life, and there's a difference between living and existing. And at that time, I was only existing. I had to live my life. You know, I have a whole family that was waiting on me. Had a brand new, my third child. So I had to start figuring it out. And it wasn't an easy path. And even then, when I left there, that it was still crashing down.
Yeah.
You know, I've had a lot of setbacks. When I do speak to people, I talk to them about wearing a mask and recovery and trauma. And it's very easy to put on that mask. Most of us are very good at it because you don't want anybody seeing the turmoil that's going on inside.
Yeah.
And I tell everybody I'm good at a lot of things, but apparently killing myself wasn't one of them. So I've attempted suicide 3 different times. For me, it was my way of, in my head, of escaping and not putting my family through it anymore.
Yeah.
And each and every time it was with a vehicle. The way that I figured it was that if I did it that way, my kids wouldn't think anything of it, because I've had 26 friends now that have taken their own lives, 34 total. 26 of them have been through a firearm. The other ones have been through pills, things like that, overdosing. For me, if I got into a vehicle accident, the easiest thing was, single vehicle accidents happen all the time. So my kids would have only looked at it as dad got into an accident, and they wouldn't have been burdened with the trauma of knowing what I did and then blaming themselves or what did I not do. That's how my brain was working.
Yeah.
And every time that I attempted, I just kept failing. And I was like, well, I'm not good at this. I might as well try to help some way else.
Really, Steve, you failed, boy.
Yeah.
You know, and like, you're so brave to sit and talk to us about this. And I just want to rewind just for a moment when you talked about earlier becoming someone who wanted to save lives and then becoming someone that wanted to take lives. I think it's important to underline that with taking lives to save lives. And you are part of a military machine. And when you are in that environment, if you didn't become that person, which there is no shame in becoming, because you are a human, and what you were being trained for and put through as a human would make you that way regardless of who you are. So there is no shame in any of that, which I think might have been a struggle to come to terms with. You're human. And then you went through this incredible and difficult recovery. But like you say, you were surviving, not thriving. You needed to be around your family. And as psychotherapists and doctors, whoever we are, people come in and they leave. And they all leave at different stages, and they'll come in at different stages. But we can't fix you completely without you being in your environment with your people. And, you know, polyvagal theory, we need to be connected to people to recover. And so what you were losing from not being there, you were gaining more from being around your family, even though you knew you weren't quite right. But your self-awareness is part of that. And you're so brave to have put your hand up and gone, let me get some help, and go through that and come out the other side and know who you are, where you're at, and be very keen to keep an eye on when it's dipping for you, because I imagine it does do this.
Also, I know you don't have to go here if you don't want to. We spoke in Vegas, and you spoke about some of the trauma you've been through, and you were, you know, sadly you lost a good friend during a deployment. Wanting to save lives and then that happening, is that where you sort of started to turn at that point, do you think?
Yeah. So, and I have no problem talking about it. I'm at a point now in my therapy that it actually is part of my therapy to not compartmentalize and actually get the things out, because that's what ended up happening to me. Everyone is, to me, everybody is born with a certain size cup. All of us have different sizes. Some of us have very large cups, some have smaller ones, and some can hold more inside of it. But what ended up happening, because I just kept on compartmentalizing and burying everything, I was like, you know what, you're fine. Suck it up, start working. But what I ended up realizing was the traumas and everything that you experience, every time you do that, you start pouring more and more into your cup. But if you never take time to start dumping your cup out a little bit, regardless of the size, what ends up happening is it starts to overflow. And then everything that's inside of it starts to spill out. It affects everything it touches: your friends, your family, your work. And that's what I got to. So then, throughout the therapy, the cognitive processing therapy, and prolonged exposure, I had to learn to start talking about it. I had to dump that cup out. So Mick, we did. We were able to speak pretty candidly. I would love to say that was the turning point to where I became extremely angry, but unfortunately, that one kind of pushed me into a no turning back thing, because I was still in a point, just like you were talking about, to where I wanted to transfer from saving to taking, but I had already started getting into that point on prior deployments. But that one definitely pushed me over the edge of anger and hostility. And I think we kind of talked about it. So on my left arm, it's my military arm. So it's got 26 negative shaded stars on it, all up and down my arm. And each one of them are negative shaded because they're missing parts of my life. And it's each one of my teammates that I watch die on the battlefield. There's 26. It's from all services, not just Air Force EOD community, but everybody that I was blessed to be on the battlefield with, that I watched them take their last breath. So 26 heroes that I've watched go into a new life. And that start of it is what started changing me. But in regards to the one that really pushed me was Tech Sergeant Tony Campbell. Mick and I were talking about it. We were operating at that time. It was in 2009, and we were with British Special Operations, and we were on a mission that we were going to take down a really bad target. And I guess I can kind of just take you through what happened that night, and I think you'll kind of understand of how it transitioned me into the person that I started to become, and then that I really started being over a long time. But it started off on December 14th of 2009. I'd like to take you with me on that day. So it was cold. The air was cold. We were in South Afghanistan. And if you can imagine taking a breath, and every single breath you take is like little needles inside of your chest. And that was the cold air just poking at your lungs. It was eerily quiet, much quieter than other missions that I had been on, and it should have been an omen to me. It was me, Tom, Tony, Derek, and we were pushing from compound to compound, clearing IED after IED. We were in this corridor, last compound we had to get into where the target was supposed to be. Everything was just silent. We started to clear our paths into the compound. We had already blown the gate down. Me and Derek were together. Tom and Tony were together. As we started clearing, Tom and Tony were off to our right. There was a doorway there that we couldn't see over our feed. So Tom stopped to look down the doorway to make sure that there was nothing coming out of it. There was no personnel in it. And Tony moved out to get his long axis security. The path that Tom had already cleared, Tony just happened to step out of it just a little bit. And then we had an accordion effect to where Vic and I started moving closer also. So we ended up within 5-6 feet of each other. Next thing I knew was everything was covered in smoke. I was about 10 to 15 feet away from where I was standing. I couldn't hear anything. All I could see was silhouettes running through the shadows of the dust. I was looking around trying to figure out what happened. I looked down next to me. Derek was laying on the ground. I didn't know if he was dead or alive, and I could just see blood all over him. I looked down at myself. I could feel the blood running down my ears. I looked at my hands, and my hands were covered in blood, and I didn't know whose blood it was. I didn't know if it was mine, if it was Derek's, if it was Tom or Tony's. And I remember just hearing a long humming sound. I couldn't hear anything else. It was all muffled, like if you were yelling into a pillow. And when I looked down at my hands, they were completely covered in blood. It was just dark red. And if you can put yourself and imagine being a little kid and putting your hands into paint and pulling them back up, that's what my hands looked like. And at this point is when I realized that we had been in an explosion. And then everything snapped to, and then it was loud. It was chaotic. I could hear the screaming and the yelling. And then all I could think about was, where is my team? Is Vic still alive? Doc came over and started working on Vic. And then the only thing I could think about was where Tom and Tony were. The clouds, the smoke clouds started to settle. All the dust started to settle. And I could see Tom crawling through the doorway on the ground. And I remember screaming at him to stay where he was because the area still wasn't clear. We didn't know exactly what happened. And Tom laid there, posted himself up against the wall. And then docs were like, we have to get out there. We got to get to him. And then all I could think about was, where's Tony? Where's my friend? For 10 days before Christmas, it's now December 15th at 02 in the morning. I look up and I can see Tony face down on the ground. His right hand was sitting in the air as he was calling over to us. There was no words, but that's what it felt like. A couple seconds went by, and I watched Tony's hand hit the ground, and I heard his last exhale leave his body. And at that time, all I could think about was getting to him and getting to Tom. I remember grabbing my detector that Vic was using, and it was destroyed. It doesn't work. So all I did was just drag my feet, trying to clear a path. Tony's body it was half of him, and he was sitting in a big puddle of his own blood. So there had to be a pathway for the docs to get to Tom, and we had to recover Tony's body. So we hooked onto Tony with a rope onto the back of his vest, started pulling his body. And if you can imagine taking a paintbrush, dipping it, and just doing one stroke, that's the pathway that was created by the blood from his body. So it was very deep and dark, and then it just started to fade. When Tony was flipped over, his eyes were wide open. And when I looked at him, it was like he was just piercing through my soul. Looked like doll's eyes, like glass. And all I could think about is, he's gone. What happened? Why him? Everything else seemed to be a blur. The next thing I remember is I was on a medevac bird. I remember looking at the PJ, not even looking at anything else, but he had a wall and it was full of his medical supplies, and he never turned around. He was just grabbing things, working on Tom, working on Vic, working on me. And I don't know if I was imagining it or if it was just as amazing as I thought it was. The dude was a stud, working on the three of us. And then we arrived at Camp Bastion. And then next thing I remember was waking up in the hospital wondering where Tom and Tony were. Tom was in surgery. Tony's body was being prepped to go back home to his family, to get on a plane with a flag draped casket. And the only thing I can remember is his last breath, hearing it leave his body. And that's something that stayed with me and will stay with me for as long as I breathe.
That's such a powerful thing to hear you talk about. And as a therapist that deals with patients with trauma, it's encouraged in our training that we don't get you to relive it and talk about it. You can talk about your feelings surrounding it, but I've always been a firm believer that every individual will do differently with what they've been through. Do you find it healing and helpful to share that in that way? Because it's not easy for you to do that.
You know, Angie, for a long time, for a long time, it was extremely hard for me to even talk about Tony. And then I found that for me, I felt like I was doing a disservice by not remembering him and telling
his story,
people what happened to him, because they needed to know. For me, I felt like everybody needed to know that he died doing things to help others.
Yeah.
That he sacrificed himself. And it was hard. And still to this day, it's hard to talk about things with Tony, but I want his memory to live on. And it's like, you know, I went through a phase where I thought that I was losing everything sanity wise. I spent years, and it made me feel crazy that I would see 4 people. I would see Tony, and all of them looked the same way they did when they died. I would see an Army guy that I was with. His name was Glenn Stivson. Earlier in that deployment, he was killed, and he died while I was doing chest compressions on him by an extremely large IED that hit their vehicle. And then 2 little Iraqi kids from my deployment in 2008. I would see the 4 of them. As we're talking right now, I would see them in different places as I'm wide awake. And it made me feel crazy, but they never looked like me looking at you and Mick right now. They always looked like it was like looking through double pane glass or looking through the side of water. It was never truly clear. I would see Tony sitting on chairs, benches, just looking at me. We never said anything to each other. Glenn, I would see in the gym, or I would see walking, and the little kids, I would see them running in and out of crowds between people's legs. My wife told me that she would wake up in the middle of the night and I would be in my kid's bedroom, sitting down, playing with those Iraqi kids, and nobody was awake. And I'm talking to them. I have no recollection of it. And I started to feel crazy. I was like, what is going on with me? Why am I seeing them? And I would dream about them. Not just the 4 of them, but I've had major incidents over my career, so it was always a Rolodex. My therapist would tell me that they were nightmares, but for me, nightmares were clowns and creepy little children or dolls. That was nightmares to me. These were all memories. These were things that already happened. And I never knew what would come, but it was always one of them. And I was at a point where I was sleeping 18 to 21 hours a week. And I did that
Yeah.
for about 10 years.
Yeah.
And as I've started speaking more and more of different incidents that happened, I do find it to where it is healing for me personally, because I'm able to tell the story that they can't tell anymore. And I don't want them to be forgotten. And I feel like if I stop telling their story, that I will forget them. And I don't want that to happen.
And you're processing every time. You're processing. When you weren't talking, you were processing. And that was just coming at you 24/7. And now it's coming out. It's like you say, you use the cup. I tend to use the fizz in the bottle. You've got to let some of it out of the bottle.
Yes.
Very great. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, I can hardly speak. It is. Do you know what? It's so complex. And nothing near the same sort of. Like, I can't even say it's close, but with the dreams, I suffer with night terrors, but I can't remember them. So we're just starting. I'm starting a new type of therapy in 3 months. They haven't told me anything about it yet, but they're going to try and unlock the memories. Because what you've said is quite. Not only was that story incredibly powerful. It was explained to me today that, because I'm getting frustrated because I'm waking up my whole house and I'm not remembering things, and it was explained to me today. Trauma, even if we don't feel it's trauma, the way that we're trained within the military with hypervigilance is our mind will basically block out the trauma, and when you go to sleep, your brain's trying to access that trauma. That comes in dreams, but then the other half of your brain kicks in and goes, oh, no, I don't want to remember this. And it blocks it back out again. And it's incredibly frustrating. And hearing you talk so calmly about that situation, I honestly, is incredible. You are inspirational. The way you've dealt with stuff, the way that you've seen where you were, and you're out the other side, and like you say, you look at yourself now and you can see you're back to you.
Yeah, and I think that's the hardest thing, Mick, is you remember what you were, Angie remembers what she was. I started looking in the mirror, and the reflection I saw, I did not like that person. That was a bad person, but everybody else saw something different because I would hide it. But I saw what was truly behind it, and I knew something had to change. And
but that's bravery just to look in the mirror. Some people won't look in the mirror, and that's not just damaging for them, that's damaging for their loved ones and their family and the people that they come across. And that's a really important thing. Just because you need to look in the mirror because you've been through trauma, it doesn't mean you're broken. It means you are ready to heal from your trauma. And what Mick's talking about with night terrors and what you're talking about with the processing that was happening that is now happening in a healthier way, there's so much research and understanding more now than there was on trauma. Can I just ask you, did you have any EMDR therapy?
So I did have EMDR. That was one of the first therapies that I went through. I was extremely volatile at that time. And when I went through EMDR, I don't think the therapist really grasped what it was, because I was very angry at him afterwards, because the way that he explained EMDR to me, he was like, I was fresh. It was a month after I returned from the deployment, Tony was killed. And my other teammate, Adam Gannett, was killed a month and 4 days later.
Yeah.
So I come home and I'm trying to piece my life together, and I get forced to go to, I say forced, I was briefed by my leadership that I will go see this medical professional. So I did. And the way he did it for me, he said, Chris, I want you to take one of your incidents that you've had, and I want you to think about it. Put it in your brain. This is what I want. He's like, I want you to understand how EMDR works. He's like, it's a one-way railroad track. So I'm going to do all this stuff with my hands, and it's going to go on this track, and you'll never think about it again.
So
It'll
Chris,
be gone from your memory.
that isn't how the MDR works. And in the UK, we are very strict on how we legislate, and you have to be a registered, then accredited therapist before you can even train in it. And you have to be, for any therapy, a willing participant. But for EMDR in particular, you have had to build a relational, comforting, safe, therapeutic space with the practitioner before any of this happens. So
this
that
was
is
20 minutes
so
into our
disheartening.
first.
Yeah,
It was 20 minutes into our first session ever meeting each other, and I think my exact words to him was, he was practicing witchcraft and that he should never be around anybody again. So
it works
he was obviously
in the right environment, but that isn't it.
So,
and if you
yeah,
want to know
that's
more
what I've heard.
about it, chapter 16 of this book is a really good, like, you've probably heard of this. Chapter 16 talks about the MDR, and it's incredible when it's done right. But there's
I've had some good friends of mine.
It's a really difficult therapy.
Yeah, I've had some good friends of mine that have had very good success stories with EMDR. That was the first type of therapy ever tried on me by that guy, and that's how he did it. And I was like,
not the right way.
I'm done.
It's a real shame.
With
you know,
with the therapy you've had, the support from your family, we seen firsthand, and we can see it now. You're an absolute machine, right? How much is sport helps you in that recovery?
Oh my gosh, Nick, I'm gonna tell you. So first off, I would be remiss not to let everybody know how my family and friends played a part in my recovery. If it wasn't for my wife and my children, especially my wife, I would not be here today talking to you guys. She refused to give up. I was as destructive as I possibly could be. I asked her for a divorce. I told her to leave me. I was like, you don't need this. I was like, you take the kids, go. Because for me, if she would have taken the last bit of things that I had, which was the 4 of them, then there was no reason for me to be here. And that was my excuse. She refused to leave. So between her and who hopefully I'll see in Germany, Jeremiah Grisham, he was my superintendent at the time, him, my commander, Peter Lee, they refused to give up on me. They started the process, and I was very, very against any of it. So I'm very thankful for them. And then I'm thankful for actually getting into the Air Force Wounded Warrior program, because I didn't know anything about it, and I didn't feel like I deserved to even be there. So it pushed me into that point that I needed to start to figure out how to deal with trauma and mix sport. I didn't realize how much that played a part in my recovery, because I had to be able to learn to shut off things that were affecting me so that I could focus. And then for the beginning of it, I used all of it as my motivators. Anytime I did something, I would think about my teammates that are gone. I would think about the heroes that are laying in the ground. That term hero has been tossed around so many times in the world. There's so many things that are looked at as they're heroes or heroic, things like that. For me, I hated being told, especially in the beginning, like, hey, you're a hero to all of us. And I was like, I was just an ordinary person that was put in an extraordinary position and just happened to come out of it. The heroes that I have are ones that are no longer with me. Those to me were my heroes. And if I could just make a quarter of my life in their footsteps, then I've been a success in my life. But then pushing that into sports, into physical activity and competition with people that are like-minded, similar traumas, and not only similar traumas as in combat, because that's honestly, that was something that when I was going through it, that I was very dismissive towards. I was like, if you're in these programs, I was like, if you weren't with me or you didn't experience the same things, it's like, why are you here? And I was very closed-minded. And then I started to learn. I started learning about cancers, accidents, all these different traumas that have happened to everybody, sexual assaults. I didn't understand that all this trauma has the same effects, regardless of what put you in that trauma. So I had to learn that all trauma, I put it into like a basket of fruit, apples, oranges, grapes, whatever it ends up being. All of them are different, but they all belong together.
And when you're in the military, a large proportion of people that have joined because they want a sense of belonging and they want a sense of family because they've come from an adverse childhood experience background, which is the start of it, and then it layers upon the trauma. And so, I know.
I've got Angie, Mick, I've got such mommy issues. That would take like.
Mate, we'll have that chat offline.
We'll have to do another episode. I think we're going to have to get you on again anyway, Chris.
But you know what I'm saying. This is part and parcel of why a lot of us joined the military in the first place, because we wanted to feel loved and a sense of belonging. We wanted to feel relevant and a sense of self. What do you see now when you look in the mirror?
I see a dad.
Good.
I see a husband. I see a friend. The old me is that's a memory. Now there's parts of him that try to come back. It is. But if it wasn't for that person, I wouldn't be the person I am now.
And that's key.
I had to layer it.
Yeah, it's compassion. We're not our own worst enemy. We need to find compassion for our younger self, because yes, that person isn't really serving us anymore, but they don't mean any harm. We can thank them kindly and tell them to F off, but they are not our enemy.
And that's what sport has done for me, because I've been able to integrate with all these different walks of life. And I've been able to realize that all that negative energy that I've had just pent up in me, I had nowhere to put it. Because before, all that bad energy, I would put into war. I would put into training for war. I would be putting into combat. That's where I had it. I don't have that anymore. And this is.
I reckon it might be right here, right now, with you. Area. No?
Maybe. So sport. That's how it helped me. Sport has just opened my world to so many different things, and it's honestly helped me become the person that I am, because I can expel when things get really bad for me. I've got a gym in my garage. So I'm like, you know what? I don't have time to go spend around a bunch of people. I don't have the energy for it. I woke up choosing violence this morning. So I choose to have violence in here instead of violence out to anybody else who is undeserving of it.
And that, I think,
so
that attitude is why you why you are where you are today. I will get it out eventually. Obviously, we seen you have an incredible games, Air Force trials. We kept, we were checking in and watching the live feeds.
Oh my God, I was up so many late nights watching you in an 8-hour time difference.
You smashed that as well, and you have been selected for Invictus and Dusseldorf.
Yes,
you have. So again, it's a better time difference. So I'll definitely be keeping track on there. Ange is going over to watch some of it.
I heard.
I'm gonna go. Yeah.
If I've had my next lot of surgery before then, I'll be on sick leave from work, so I will be joining her.
Make that happen, Mr. Kev.
Well, still waiting to hear though. But and this is, I said to you earlier, right? It is incredibly hard, right, to get a story across in less than an hour. And we've done an hour, already. It's been that
I think we need an episode
easy
2 with
to
you,
talk
fella.
to. Yeah, I think we're going to have to definitely do a follow-up. Post Invictus, give you a little bit of time to train and obviously spend that quality time with the family and to get over speaking to us clowns.
Yeah, anything you guys ever need, I'm gonna tell you, it is a breath of fresh air to see first off to see the two of you, but to understand what it is that you guys are doing. You have no idea how much what you are doing affects other people. And if any of these stories, and I've listened to the different stories that have been on here, if it affects one person, it's not just one person that it's helping the people that are around them. It's a ripple effect. It's like throwing a stone into the water. And that's what you guys are doing, and you're helping the people that are actually coming on here, like myself included. It's another one of those sessions, being able to talk to a friend. And that's exactly what this is. And being able to get out some of that trauma that you've experienced in different ways and let the world know that it's okay. For the longest time, I was like, I'm broken. I'm this broken toy that just gets cast away. And like the things that you guys are doing, it lets everybody know that it's okay.
Thank you.
There's
And that's
so many of us.
one of our massive drivers is that we see the heartbreak involved in those that aren't willing to look in the mirror. And, we're all human. We're all a product of our environment and what we've been through. We're not broken. We just need to be
everybody gets a visit from the dark dog now and again.
Yeah. That's right. And I had a dip in Vegas, and Mick was like, showed up big time, you and Lee, for me, and then I couldn't get rid of the pair of you. But they're like friends for life. And we all sat around and we had those chats, and we really went there. And the growth that we go through as people comes from those painful places.
Absolutely. You couldn't have said that any better, because that's the pain you go through. That's what you grow through.
The cracks are where the light gets in.
Yes,
exactly. But it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you tonight, mate.
Likewise.
Well, morning for you.
Yep.
So thank you very much. And if you're listening, as always, there'll be links in the chat of where to get support if you require support. I will, if possible, if you've got some links I can throw in there to the US side of things for support and recovery, I'll grab them from you. And
of course,
thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thank you so much. Great to see you guys.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. When you go home, tell them of us and say, for your tomorrow, we gave our today.